Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on an analysis of a really historic stack of sources. We have the official scientific report of the 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, the DGAC, and it's backed up by some pretty exhaustive international data on, well, everything. Chronic disease, the politics of alcohol, you name it.
It's true. The sources we have in front of us really document what is, it's fundamentally a new scientific contract.
Yeah.
A contract between the government, the medical community, and, the American people.
Right.
We are unpacking the implications of a date that I think signals a real turning point in U.S. public health history, January 8, 2026. This date, it's this definitive push to align the national diet with reducing chronic disease, and it should be seen as historic for the food industry, for healthcare, for everyone.
Absolutely. And our mission today is it's really laser focused on you, the learner. We need to dissect this massive body of new scientific consensus and translate it into something actionable. The question is, what lifestyle shifts do these findings actually demand? For your own health span and, crucially, for the health and future of your children and your grandchildren.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about surviving here. We're talking about thriving, extending those healthy years of life, shrinking the footprint of chronic disease, and ultimately, maybe, reducing the astronomical medical costs that burden every family.
And this deep dive really shows that the most powerful, the most immediate lever we have for maximizing longevity and health span, it's not found in a new drug. It's not some radical new technology. It's systemic dietary change.
It's right there on the plate.
It is. The DGAC findings solidify the evidence that proper nutrition applied consistently across a lifetime is the critical determinant of whether you live a long life or a long, healthy life.
Oh.
A life free from that heavy anchor of what we call non-communicable diseases.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start with the stark, truly sobering reality that made this whole overhaul necessary in the first place. The scale of poor health in the U.S., which is meticulously documented in the DGAC report, it's a national crisis.
It is. The current health metrics are just astonishing, and they clearly show this catastrophic misalignment between the typical American diet and even the previous health guidelines. The sheer prevalence of these diet-related chronic conditions is the central reason this whole report exists.
So let's look at the adult reality. This is data every senior listener really needs to internalize because it's shaping their own physical future. The prevalence of overweight and obesity among U.S. adults, we're talking ages 20 and up, stands at an incredible 73%.
73.
That means if you look around any room, almost 3 out of every 4 people are dealing with the increased risks that come with excess weight.
And you can see the internal cascade of disease risks so clearly in the data. The risk factors for cardiovascular disease, they're rampant. 59% of adults and older adults have high LDL cholesterol.
The bad cholesterol.
The bad cholesterol, exactly. But if you drill down into the age groups that are, most engaged in work and family life, the picture gets even darker. Among males aged 40 to 59, the prevalence of high LDL cholesterol hits a shocking 73%.
Wow, so for middle-aged men, it's the same number as the overall obesity rate. It's the norm.
It is the dominant health reality. It's not an outlier. And it indicates decades of arterial stress building up.
And the inevitable downstream consequence of that is, of course, the explosion of metabolic diseases.
Right. 16% of adults 20 and older have either been diagnosed with or are unknowingly living with diabetes. But the truly frightening aspect, and what connects this discussion directly to the future burden on our listeners' families, is the youth crisis.
This is the part of the report that really stopped me in my tracks.
It is the most alarming data point for the future of public health. For long-term economic viability. We are setting up the next generation for severe health struggles, and much earlier than previous generations. We see a 36% prevalence of overweight or obesity in children and adolescents, ages 2 to 19.
1 in 3 kids.
1 in 3. And even worse, 38% of individuals aged 12 to 19 already have prediabetes.
38% of teenagers are already on the road to type 2 diabetes. That's almost 2 in 5. It's just incredible. This prevalence means that future chronic conditions, the heart disease, the cancers, the full-blown diabetes, they're being set in motion in adolescence, not in middle age.
Right. It fundamentally compromises the health span of the next generation before they even become full adults.
So when you connect these U.S.-specific figures to that broader global conversation about longevity, the stakes become profoundly clear.
They do. These diseases, CV, diabetes, cancer, they're all classified as non-communicable diseases, or NCDs. And a recent World Health Organization report looking globally, underscored just how fatal these preventable conditions are. They found that in Europe, 1 in 5 men and 1 in 10 women die prematurely before age 70 because of NCDs.
And what fraction of those deaths are considered preventable through lifestyle changes?
A staggering 60%. 60% of those avoidable deaths are explicitly linked to preventable causes. And the two primary levers are unhealthy diets and excessive alcohol use.
So for our listeners who are focused on longevity, on reducing that future burden of care, improving diet isn't just a secondary tactic.
It's not. It is the single most effective and powerful lever for extending a truly healthy lifespan, for extending your health span.
And the reason our diets are failing us so spectacularly, the reason we're in this crisis, is documented right there by the DGAC. It comes down to overconsumption.
Precisely. The data shows, unequivocally, a massive population-wide overconsumption of sodium, added sugars, and saturated fat. Take sodium. 89% of individuals aged 1 year and older consume sodium above the chronic disease risk reduction intakes, the CDRR.
89%. That's basically everyone.
It's a population-level failure of epic proportions. And it's driven by our consumption of prepared and processed foods.
So where is all this sodium and saturated fat coming from? It's not really the salt shaker on the table, is it?
No, not primarily. While added sugars and saturated fat are generally overconsumed across the board, the report details specific dietary patterns. A lot of the top food sources people rely on for their daily energy. Things like mixed dishes, burgers, sandwiches, pizza, tacos, grain-based dishes.
Convenient stuff.
The convenient stuff. Those are the top sources of saturated fat and sodium in the U.S. population. The pattern is so clear. Nutrient-dense foods, like vegetables, whole grains, beans, are chronically underconsumed, while the nutrients we need to limit, sodium, sugar, saturated fat, are overwhelmingly overconsumed, mainly through these highly palatable, processed composite foods.
That paints a really dire picture of the baseline health landscape. But the committee's response isn't just a list of don'ts. It's a detailed, flexible, and scientifically rigorous blueprint to try and fix this. And this is where it gets really interesting. The committee recognized that the old one-size-fits-all guidance, which clearly failed to reach that 89% of Americans overconsuming sodium, it needed to be replaced by a flexible, unifying, and practical new blueprint they're calling the Eat Healthy Your Way dietary pattern. And this is designed to be the definitive guide for everyone, ages 2 and up.
This new vision is, I think, revolutionary.
Yeah.
It is. Because it integrates 2 key ideas. First, it builds on decades of consistent, robust scientific evidence about nutrient density. And second, it places health equity and cultural responsiveness at its very core. The goal is to create one single, inclusive pattern that works within the diverse foodways of the entire U.S. population.
Okay, so before we get into the specific changes, let's just confirm the foundation. What are the core non-negotiable components that have consistently shown a benefit for things like lower risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes?
The systematic reviews conducted by the committee just confirmed the absolute core principles that have held up across multiple scientific guidelines since 2015. A healthy pattern has to emphasize consistently higher intakes of, well, vegetables, especially the non-starchy ones.
Right.
Fruits, in their whole form, not juice. Legumes, which covers beans, peas, and lentils, and they're getting a huge structural boost now.
We'll get to that.
Nuts and seeds. Whole grains, not refined grains. Fish and seafood. And vegetable oils high in unsaturated fat. And conversely, the pattern demands lower intakes of red and processed meats, sugar-sweetened foods and beverages, refined grains, and saturated fat. These are like the fixed points of the new dietary universe.
But the DJC 2025 report doesn't just stop there. They propose some really significant specific modifications to the existing guidance based on detailed food pattern modeling. These adjustments are what's crucial for optimizing how we get our nutrients and reducing chronic disease risk in the most effective way. So let's dig into the 2 major shifts.
Okay, so the first big shift is a change in vegetable ratios. This is not just telling people eat more vegetables, it's changing which vegetables they should prioritize.
So what's the proposed swap exactly, and why is the committee recommending it?
The modification proposes a pretty significant structural increase in the intake of beans, peas, and lentils, while at the same time implementing a decrease in starchy vegetables, things like potatoes specifically, and this is all within the same total vegetable food group allowance.
I see, so you're swapping one for the other.
Exactly, and the rationale is multifaceted, and it's deeply tied to reducing chronic disease. Legumes, like beans and lentils, are just powerhouses of fiber and plant-based protein. They've got micronutrients like iron, folate, magnesium, and crucially, they have a lower glycemic load than a lot of starchy vegetables. The reviews clearly showed that healthy patterns are strongly associated with a shift toward these higher plant protein sources.
So by trading starchy vegetables for legumes, you instantly get better nutrient implications.
Instantly. You get higher fiber for gut health and feeling full, higher protein for muscle maintenance, which is so critical for seniors, and better blood sugar control, which is essential given that, as we just said, 38% of our teens are already pre-diabetic.
So it's about swapping a high carbohydrate filler for a nutrient-dense, fiber-rich, protein-contributing food. You're maximizing the nutritional yield of every single bite.
Exactly. It's optimizing the diet for longevity. It moves us away from those high glycemic starches, which many Americans already eat plenty of, and toward nutrient-dense legumes, which are chronically underconsumed.
Okay, now for the second big proposed modification. This one targets the protein food group, and this is where, as I mentioned, the conversation can get a little politically charged in some food sectors. The recommendation is to reduce the total protein foods group overall by cutting back on meat, poultry, and eggs.
That's the second adjustment they identified through their modeling. And it's driven by the finding that systematic reviews consistently associated healthy dietary patterns with lower intakes of red and processed meats. The core goal here is preventing chronic disease, specifically reducing risks for cardiovascular disease and certain cancers, where red and processed meat intake is implicated.
But I have to push back a little here on behalf of our senior listeners. They're rightly concerned about maintaining muscle mass, preventing sarcopenia, especially in later life. If we reduce the total protein food group, how does the DGAC make sure that older adults, in particular, still get enough quality protein and micronutrients like vitamin B12 and iron, which are often so efficiently supplied by meat?
That is the essential nuance, and the committee was very careful to address it. They defined the reduction not as a mandate for deficiency, but as a shift in composition. The goal is to reduce the high-risk components, the red and processed meats, while ensuring total nutrient adequacy through other healthier sources.
So it relies heavily on leveraging those increased beans, peas, and lentils.
Exactly. And fish, seafood, other healthy plant-based proteins. The DGAC's modeling shows that by increasing the nutrient density of the total diet through vegetables and whole grains, the overall need for large quantities of saturated fat-heavy meat is reduced, and the body's nutritional requirements are still met.
That really clarifies the emphasis. It's not just less meat, it's smarter protein sources. More plants, more fish, less of the processed stuff linked to disease.
Precisely. And this is all wrapped up in the philosophy of the Eat Healthy Your Way pattern, which is fundamentally driven by health equity.
Explain that link. Why are flexibility and health equity so intertwined here?
Because the committee recognizes that prescriptive, culturally insensitive dietary advice just doesn't work for a population as diverse as the United States. It's failed. They explicitly work to ensure the pattern is generalizable and inclusive. It acknowledges the diverse foodways of Black, Hispanic, Latino, Indigenous, and Asian American populations.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Traditional diets in many Hispanic and Latino communities already feature a high consumption of beans and legumes. The new guidance validates and elevates those food traditions. It makes the guidance more relevant and, frankly, more achievable for them. They did these novel evidence scans on culturally responsive approaches to ensure the advice works in the real world, to give everyone a fair chance to attain their highest level of health, no matter their background or food environment.
Okay, let's transition to what I think is the most fundamental structural change in the guidelines. A recommendation that really attacks the American culture of low nutrient indulgence. The removal of the discretionary calorie line. This strikes me as the biggest philosophical shift of all.
It is arguably the most uncompromising stance the committee took, and it was a key recommendation. Historically, the dietary guidelines included a line item called limits on calories for other uses. This gave a quantitative estimate, a number of calories, that theoretically remained after a person had eaten all the recommended food groups in their most nutrient-dense forms.
And what did that line item allow consumers to use those leftover calories on?
Those spare calories could theoretically be used for added sugars, saturated fat, and/or alcohol. Essentially, the previous guidance inadvertently offered a quantifiable junk food allowance built right into the National Nutrition Blueprint.
So it was basically a formal permission slip. You could allocate a certain number of calories to things that provided no health benefit, often high sugar, high fat items. Why did they get rid of it completely?
The removal of this line signals an uncompromising alignment toward nutrient density, period. The committee determined that, Given the sheer variability in the caloric content of nutrient-dense foods and the fact that most Americans are not eating foods in their most nutrient-dense forms, presenting a number for extra calories was misleading, imprudent, and easily misinterpreted as a justification for indulging.
So the implication for the listener is crystal clear. If you truly follow the new eat healthy your way, pattern prioritizing vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins in their most nutrient-dense forms with minimal added stuff, the reality is there might literally be no calories left over for discretionary use.
That is the philosophical change. It elevates nutrient density to the highest priority. It structurally emphasizes that virtually every calorie you eat should contribute beneficially to your nutritional requirements. This change is a massive signal to the food industry and, critically, to consumers. It closes the door on using the dietary guidelines to implicitly justify excess sugar, fat, or alcohol.
Now, let's focus specifically on the learner's core interests. Maximizing longevity, particularly for those aged 51 and older, and the huge responsibility they have in shaping the habits of younger generations. The DGAC report is very specific about nutritional shortfalls for seniors. What are the key nutrients of public health concern for healthy aging?
This section is absolutely critical for anyone focused on extending their health span, especially into their 70s and beyond. The data identifies chronic shortfalls in several areas that directly impact bone density, cardiovascular health, and nervous system function.
Where do we start?
First, calcium. This is a pervasive problem. Calcium is essential for bone structure, metabolism, nerve signaling. The majority of older females, a staggering 82% of those aged 71 and older, have intakes below the estimated average requirement, the EER.
82%.
And for males in that same age group, it's 58% below the EER. A deficiency here dramatically increases the risk of bone fragility, fractures, and osteoporosis, which can just severely limit mobility and independence in later life.
And the report made a powerful intergenerational connection here. It highlighted that this calcium risk isn't just an aging issue.
You're right, it did. And it's a parallel that should alarm parents and grandparents. The age group most at risk for low calcium, second only to the oldest women, is adolescent females. Ages 14 to 18, 86% of them are below the ER. This is the crucial period for achieving peak bone mass, which dictates your future osteoporosis risk.
So when the grandparent and the grandchild face the exact same fundamental nutrient shortfall.
It just underscores the need for a family-wide structural dietary correction.
And how does this relate to vitamin D, which often works hand in hand with calcium?
Well, vitamin D intakes are just abysmal across the entire U.S. population. 95% or more of the population, ages 1 and up, has intakes below the ER. Since vitamin D facilitates calcium absorption, a deficiency in one just makes the shortfall in the other even worse. And for seniors, vitamin D also plays roles in muscle function and immunity, so this widespread deficiency is an acute public health concern.
Then there is potassium. It's often overshadowed by other nutrients, but the DGAC lists it as critical for cardiovascular and kidney function.
It is. Potassium is essential for maintaining fluid balance and regulating blood pressure. It acts as a counterbalance to all that sodium we're eating. And the data specifically notes that non-Hispanic Black individuals are at an elevated risk for low potassium intakes. Addressing this is crucial for tackling hypertension, a major risk factor for heart disease and stroke.
Finally, let's revisit protein. We talked about the DGAC's recommendation to reduce the meat, poultry, and egg subgroup, but the raw nutrient data suggests some older adults still struggle with total protein intake, which is essential to combat muscle loss.
That's a vital distinction. While the total protein foods intake as a food group might be technically met by the general population, the intake of dietary protein as a raw nutrient can still be low for specific vulnerable subgroups.
Yeah.
Specifically, 14% of females aged 71 and older have dietary protein intakes below the ears. So the DGAC's guidance to shift away from high saturated fat protein sources has to be coupled with an absolute certainty that total caloric and protein needs are met in this senior population. The alternatives like legumes, fish, dairy have to be integrated effectively.
Okay, moving from the individual plate to the home environment, let's talk about the caregiver strategies that adults, parents, and grandparents can use immediately to shape the future health of their children. The DGAC emphasizes that the food environment, the availability, the access, the modeling is what shapes a child's choices.
Yeah, the report dedicates a lot of attention to this because adult behavior really dictates the health trajectory of the young. The DGAC stresses the need for evidence-based behavioral strategies across the entire life course.
What's the single best, most actionable piece of advice from the evidence for encouraging young children, say ages 2 to 6, to accept and enjoy those healthy, nutrient-dense foods like vegetables?
The evidence strongly supports structured feeding practices, and particularly the concept of repeated exposure. This strategy has the most robust association with promoting the acceptance of healthy foods, especially fruits and vegetables, among young kids.
Why is repeated exposure so powerful, especially for vegetables?
Well, kids are biologically wired to prefer sweetness, so fruits are a relatively easy sell. Vegetables, though, often contain bitter flavor notes, which children can instinctively reject. The robust evidence shows it can take 8 to 15 exposures to a single food item before a child moves from rejection to just neutrality or even acceptance.
8 to 15 times.
Yes, so structured practices mean actively, calmly, and repeatedly offering a small portion of a new or less preferred vegetable at routine meals. Without pressure, without expectation, you just allow the child to get familiar with the flavor and texture. Organizing the child's physical and social eating environment like that is critical.
That is fantastic, actionable advice. Now let's look at an equally actionable behavioral target for adults themselves, particularly those under 60. Late evening consumption. The DGAC data on this is highly specific.
This is such a clear and immediate target for behavioral modification. It can significantly move the needle toward meeting the new guidelines. The data defines late evening consumption as eating any food or beverage other than plain water between 8 p.m. and 11:59 p.m.
And how many adults are doing this? What's the caloric impact?
A huge portion of the younger adult population, 66% of those aged 20-59, engage in this late-night eating habit, and they consume, on average, about 550 kilocalories during that short window.
550 calories, right before the metabolic slowdown of sleep. If that habit is contributing 550 kilocalories daily, what's the nutritional cost?
Well, those 550 kcals are high-risk calories. They contribute 25% of the person's total daily energy intake. And crucially, they also contribute 26% of their daily added sugars intake and 26% of their daily saturated fat intake. This is where the nutrient-to-limit problem is concentrated.
What are they eating?
The top food categories are savory snacks, sweet bakery products, candy, and ice cream, along with sugar-sweetened non-alcoholic beverages.
So if a listener wants an immediate, high-impact behavioral modification to align with the Eat Healthy Your Way pattern, eliminating that 8 p.m. to midnight snacking window is the clearest path to instantly cutting a quarter of their daily added sugars and saturated fat.
Precisely. It directly attacks the sources of overconsumption that the DGAC is trying to eliminate.
Okay, let's pivot now to Section 4. This is a truly contentious area that directly impacts longevity and chronic disease risk. It's one that the DGAC report handled decisively by removing alcohol from that discretionary calories line we talked about. The science on alcohol consumption and health is it's currently undergoing a massive and often controversial shift.
It is a scientific battlefield. We are seeing a major pushback against long-held beliefs, and it's driven by newer methodologies that challenge decades of observational data.
Let's start with the traditional view, the one many older adults hold, which is based on the cardioprotective debate.
Right. For decades, just vast amounts of epidemiological and observational research consistently supported a strong association, the famous J-shaped curve. This curve suggested that light to moderate alcohol consumption, often defined as 1 to 2 drinks per day, was linked to a lower risk of most cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, and other common diseases of aging. Moderate drinkers consistently appeared to have better health outcomes and lower all-cause mortality than abstainers.
And some researchers, we noted in our sources, claim that the size of this reduction in CV mortality is greater than almost any dietary intervention or pharmaceutical drug. They argue this consistent data reflects a genuine biological effect.
That is the traditional, robust viewpoint. However, this view has been fiercely challenged in recent years by major scientific bodies. Most notably, the American Heart Association, the AHA, and the European Association of Preventive Cardiology, the EAPC. They are highly skeptical of the J-curve conclusion.
What's their core critique, and what specific new methodologies are they using that contradict decades of traditional observation?
Their core critique is that observational studies suffer from confounding factors and what's called healthy user bias. For instance, people who choose to drink moderately often have higher incomes, better health care, healthier diets overall. They're more physically active than people who abstain. And many of those abstainers don't drink because of pre-existing poor health. So the moderate drinking might just be a marker of an overall healthy lifestyle, not the cause of better health.
And this is where the new methodologies come in. The AHA and EAPC statements cite recent studies using new methodologies, which often include Mendelian randomization. We need to define that. What is it, and why is it considered more robust?
Mendelian randomization is a sophisticated genetic technique. It uses naturally occurring variations in our genes, specifically genes that influence how we metabolize alcohol, as proxies for lifetime exposure. Because these genetic variations are assigned randomly at conception, they're much less susceptible to that healthy user bias or the other confounding factors that plague observational studies.
So instead of asking someone how much they drink, which has all kinds of reporting bias, MR uses genetics to create a kind of natural randomized control trial.
Exactly. And the MR studies often show that when you remove those confounding factors, the apparent cardioprotection at low levels of alcohol consumption largely disappears. Or, in some cases, the risk just continues to increase even at low levels. So these bodies now argue that no level of alcohol consumption should be promoted for health benefits.
But the conflict doesn't end there. Those who support the observational findings, like institutions such as ISFAR, they criticize MSR. What's their counterargument?
The critique is that these recent studies may display confirmatory bias. They're looking for results that fit a preconceived notion of harm, and that MR itself uses potentially inappropriate or limited techniques. For instance, critics argue that MR often only tracks the effect of a single gene variant linked to heavy drinking tolerance, not the complex lifetime pattern of light, regular consumption, which is what the original data linked to protection. They maintain that you can't just dismiss decades of consistent observational data showing a benefit because of a few new genetic studies that might not fully model the biological reality. The scientific community is really wrestling with this conflict right now.
So it sounds like the jury is still out on whether a small amount of alcohol is beneficial, but there is zero debate on the confirmed adverse findings, right? The risks that are universally accepted. What are those?
The risks are clear and multifaceted. First and foremost is cancer. The global burden of breast cancer in particular is demonstrably attributable to alcohol consumption, even at moderate levels. Alcohol is metabolized into acetaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. Furthermore, a large U.S. cohort study, the NIH-AARP study, found that alcohol consumption was associated with an increased risk of melanoma, linking alcohol to certain skin cancers.
And beyond specific cancers, there's a clear link between drinking patterns and developing multimorbidity, having multiple chronic conditions at the same time.
That's a crucial insight for longevity. A detailed study on this trajectory found that both the amount of alcohol consumed and the specific drinking pattern have important effects on developing multimorbidity and progressing toward death. A really specific finding was that drinking without food was associated with significantly higher risks across almost all phases of multimorbidity development compared to drinking with food.
And that particular study also noted that not all types of alcohol were equal in that progression.
That's right. While harmful associations were found for spirits and beer consumption regarding the progression of multiple chronic illnesses, red wine did not show similar negative associations in that specific study. This suggests that the type of beverage, and maybe the polyphenols or antioxidants it contains, may still play a differentiating role, which adds complexity to the public health message.
Given this accumulating body of evidence highlighting these clear and confirmed risks, regardless of the cardioprotection debate, we're seeing a dramatic global trend toward tightening controls and implementing robust public health measures.
The policy shifts are highly coordinated, and they reflect a real determination to curb preventable harm. Let's just look at the data points, starting with the immediate dangers in the U.S. In traffic safety, alcohol impairment is still devastating. It's much more prevalent among speeding drivers in fatal crashes. 38% of speeding drivers were alcohol impaired, compared to 16% of non-speeding drivers. And the highest rates of impairment happen during those late evening hours, between midnight and 2:59 a.m., which just reinforces the DGAC's call to curb late-night consumption overall.
And globally, we're seeing aggressive fiscal measures being used to shape behavior.
The World Health Organization is leading a major initiative called 3x35, urging countries to raise health taxes on alcohol, tobacco, and sugary drinks by at least 50% by 2035. The goal is twofold: prevent 50 million premature deaths and generate about $1 trillion for health services over the next decade.
And we're seeing a rapid response to that tax push in major economies.
Absolutely. Vietnam, for example, which is Southeast Asia's second largest beer market, has already approved a plan to significantly increase its special consumption tax on beer and strong liquor up to 90% by 2031. The government expects this incremental but aggressive tax hike to reduce overall consumption by making these products substantially less affordable.
And in terms of protecting youth, we're seeing international policy moving the goalposts entirely.
Yes. Trinidad and Tobago is taking dramatic steps, raising the legal age for alcohol consumption from 18 to 21, and at the same time, raising the age for gambling and marijuana use to 25. Similarly, Greece has tightened ID requirements and completely banned minors from bars and clubs. The global policy trend is unequivocally moving toward tighter, more controlled access. It reflects the consensus that alcohol is a major preventable risk factor. So let's synthesize all of this now. The urgent health crisis we detailed in Section 1 and the detailed DGAC blueprint for change in Section 2, they confirm the foundational mandate. A systemic dietary shift paired with healthy behavioral habits is not just a suggestion, it is the most powerful evidence-based path to maximize longevity and minimize the staggering financial and personal costs of chronic disease.
And this path extends far beyond just physical wellness. The sources detail the incredible, quantifiable impact a comprehensive, healthy lifestyle has on mental health, which is equally critical for a high-quality health span.
This is one of the most compelling findings for our listeners, I think. Researchers developed a comprehensive healthy lifestyle score, integrating 7 crucial factors: a healthy diet, like the DGAC pattern, regular physical activity, no smoking, light or moderate alcohol consumption, adequate sleep, active social connection, and less sedentary behavior.
So what were the results when they applied this score to mental health outcomes?
The participants who adopted this comprehensive 7-point healthy lifestyle pattern showed a massive 69% lower risk of new onset mental disorders. Breaking that down, the risk was lowered by 55% for depression, 47% for anxiety, and a stunning 61% for bipolar disorder. This is robust evidence that fundamentally links a healthy body to a resilient mind.
That is profound. A lifestyle shift isn't just preventing heart attacks, it's actively protecting your cognitive and emotional well-being. Now, let's get to the core of the longevity promise, the quantifiable impact on mortality and life expectancy.
The data on life expectancy is just dramatic. This comprehensive healthy lifestyle pattern resulted in significantly lower risks of death, a 54% lower risk for participants without mental disorders, and a remarkable 60% lower risk for those with mental disorders compared to their peers living a poor lifestyle.
Let's talk about the hard numbers. The increase in healthy lifespan for a 40-year-old taking control of their habits today.
When researchers calculated the additional years of life expectancy gained at age 40 from adopting this optimal, comprehensive lifestyle, the results were transformative. For individuals without mental disorders, the healthy pattern added 11.6 years to their life expectancy compared to those with a poor lifestyle.
Over a decade.
Over a decade. But even more striking, for participants with existing mental disorders like depression or anxiety, the healthy lifestyle added a phenomenal 14.4 years of life expectancy.
14 years. That suggests a healthy lifestyle is not only the best preventive medicine, but it's also an intensely therapeutic, life-extending measure, even for those already managing chronic conditions. This really confirms the DGAC 2025 mandate.
It absolutely does. The DGAC's push to align the U.S. diet by prioritizing nutrient density, shifting protein sources away from high-risk items, and getting rid of that discretionary calorie loophole is designed to move the entire U.S. population toward this comprehensive, health-extending longevity pattern. The ultimate vision is a future where chronic diseases drop precipitously, individual health span increases dramatically, and the crushing financial and emotional burden of medical costs decreases for everyone, for you, your children, and your grandchildren.
So, to summarize this extensive deep dive, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee's 2025 report represents a new and necessary scientific contract. The typical U.S. diet is failing the vast majority of Americans, leading to staggering rates of obesity, high cholesterol, and prediabetes starting in youth. The resulting framework, the Eat Healthy Your Way pattern, is a flexible, nutrient-dense blueprint based on 3 major structural shifts: increasing beans, peas, and lentils, reducing red and processed meat, and the critical removal of the misleading limits on calories for other uses. This historic guidance, which makes January 8, 2026 a landmark date in public health, isn't merely about weight management. It is a foundational systemic change aimed directly at extending the healthy years of life for everyone.
But this does raise an important question, though, as we wrap up. We've reviewed the massive push for national cultural shifts in diet and the committee's intentional focus on health equity and flexibility. Yet the DGAC report also pointed out significant health disparities that we can't ignore. Non-Hispanic Black adults, for instance, have significantly higher rates of obesity, 50%, than non-Hispanic Asian adults at 16%. These disparities are directly linked to underlying economic, social, and environmental disadvantages. We now have a truly science-backed dietary plan aimed at all Americans, but when we consider the resources required to consistently access and prepare these nutrient-dense foods, how far can population-level guidelines truly go without first addressing the core economic, social, and environmental factors, the social determinants of health, that fundamentally shape people's ability to actually eat healthy your way in the first place?